Aren't you just tired of junglers constantly inting your league games like it was the one sole thing they were put on this earth to do? Or those dreaded gray screens from taking back to back to back to back eighths in TFT? I know I sure am. That's why I've got good news for everyone. Riot is coming out with a brand new trading card game called Riftbound. Today we're going to learn how to play it so that you can become the legend without APM that you were always meant to be. What's up, YouTube? I'm Joey. Welcome to the 50K Comics YouTube channel. Some of you guys might recognize me from my time doing content for the Dragon Ball Super card game. If you are one of those people, hello, it's so good to see you. I've missed you guys. I've been taking a break from card games and content for quite a while. I have to say though, Riftbound has pulled me back in and reinvigorated my love for card games in a way that I haven't felt since probably I started playing Dragon Ball Super about 10 years ago. This game has truly captivated me. I've been loving playing it, and I want to share that with you today as we learn how to play. So I'd recommend subscribing because you will be seeing some more Riftbound content from me. Yes, I am getting back into the content game. So whether you're a returning fan of the channel, or you're a League of Legends masochist, or you're a Masters TFT player like myself, shameless plug, or you're just dabbling into card games for the first time, thought it looked cool and want to see what it's all about, let's go ahead and learn how to play Riftbound TCG. We'll be using Tabletop Simulator to learn how to play Riftbound TCG today. This is how I've been playing with my friends online. The game doesn't actually release in English until late October. So if you're interested in learning how to play Riftbound online via Tabletop Simulator, I will be creating a YouTube short for exactly how to do that. So stay tuned. Once that video is up, I'll put the link for it in the description of this video. But for now, this is what we'll be using, and the board here that's been created is honestly a great representation of what it's going to look like IRL. So let's get right on into it. Going from the top to the bottom, we're going to start with our battlefields. Battlefields are sort of a shared space between both players. All the combat in this game is going to occur in the battlefields. Both players will select one battlefield from their 3-card battlefield deck and put them in the battlefield zones, and you'll fight for control of these battlefields throughout the game. That's how you score points. The first player to score 8 points by taking control of the battlefields will win the game. There are specific rules for how to score your 8th and final point that I think are a really great addition to the game. They're a little bit complicated. We'll go over those later, though. To show some examples of battlefields, we have Reaver's Row here on the left, and we have Obelisk of Power here on the right. Now, the card effects might not make sense to you quite yet, but as we learn how to play the game, they'll start to make more sense. Moving down the game mat, our next area is the base, which is, of course, very thematic to League of Legends. This is where you're going to play the majority of your units before you send them out to fight in the battlefields, and this is also where you will play your gear cards. We'll go over main deck card types after we finish going over the layout of the game board. The next part of the game board is going to be the legend area, which is going to house our deck's chosen legend or leader. So this is going to be the character that your deck is pretty much based around. All leader cards have 2 colors as of right now, and the 2 colors that your leader possesses are the 2 colors that you can play in your main deck. For the purpose of this example, we're using Miss Fortune Bounty Hunter here. Next to the legend area, we have our champion area. What the champion area is, that is a card that you're allowed to select from your main deck that is the same character as your legend. So you can see here our legend or our leader is Miss Fortune. So I'm allowed to take a Miss Fortune champion unit from my main deck and put it in the champion area at the start of the game. This essentially serves as an extension of my hand. I can play this card to my base or wherever else may be applicable by paying the 4 just as if this card was in my hand. Yet another cool piece of thematics and added consistency that Riftbound brings to the table. Going over to the right, we have our main deck area. This is comprised of 40 cards combining combinations of units, spells, and gears. You can see that I'm hovering over my deck right now. It shows 39 cards because I've taken my 1 Miss Fortune that I'm allowed to put in my champion area out of the deck, making it a 39 card deck. Next to the main deck, we have our trash. You'll know from other games as the graveyard or the discard pile, same exact thing. Off to the right, next to the trash, this is not an official game mat zone, but this is where on Tabletop Simulator, you can recycle cards. The reason I bring this up, even though it's not an actual zone on the board, is because Riftbound, what they've done is they've removed the need to shuffle during gameplay, which is great in a lot of ways. It reduces overall game time spent. So if you're a competitive player like myself, you go to tournaments and get very frustrated when games go into time or overtime. This is something that's been done to prevent that from happening as much as possible. So on Tabletop Simulator specifically, when you want to put cards to the bottom of your deck or recycle them, as the game uses terminology to describe, you would put the card in this area, hit this recycle button, and it'll be automatically put to the bottom of your deck. So you'll see card effects that say recycle this card or recycle a card. That just means put it to the bottom of your deck. The last area on the game board we need to go over is the rune area, which is here on the bottom. This is going to house your runes. You can see it's numbered to 12 here on Tabletop Simulator because you can have a maximum of 12 runes in your deck. Those runes are going to be the same color as your leader. So for example, we have an orange rune representing body, which is one of the colors of misfortune, and we have a purple rune representing chaos, which is misfortune's other color. You can comprise your 12 card rune deck of any combination of the two colors that your legend possesses. These runes are going to be used to pay both energy costs and power costs, which is a perfect segue to get into our main deck card types. Next, we'll go over our 3 different main deck card types. Now, keep in mind, when you are building your 40 card main deck, it can be built with up to 3 copies of any of these main deck cards. 3 copies is a play set in this game. Also, when it comes to champions that you'll play in your deck, I can play 3 copies of any different misfortunes in this example as I want to. There is a purple misfortune and an orange misfortune. I can play 3 of each if I wish to, but I cannot exceed 3 copies of any main deck card in the main deck. Our first example for a main deck card type is going to be units, which are probably going to be the most prevalent types you'll see in the game. Our example for a unit here is going to be Traveling Merchant, and we'll use Traveling Merchant to go over the biology of a main deck unit, if you will. Starting in the top left, you'll see the number 2. This is the card's printed play cost. The 2 here means that you'll take 2 of your runes, turn them sideways, or tap them to play Traveling Merchant into your base. The number on the upper right hand side is going to be the unit's might. That is going to serve as its attacking power and its health. We'll talk more about that in the combat section of this video later on. You can also see there in the middle of the card, it specifically tells you this card is a unit, so you'll never be wondering whether a card is a unit, a spell, or a gear. And then on the bottom, you have the card's effect. In the case of Traveling Merchant, when I move, you discard 1 card and draw 1 card. Moving is a key element of this game. As I mentioned before, you'll be playing units into your base. Your objective will be to move them into battlefields to do combat there, and then eventually hopefully take control of those battlefields. So when you do move Traveling Merchant to a battlefield or even back to your base, you can discard a card and draw a card. For our next main deck card type, we'll be talking about gears, and we'll be using this orange Seal of Strength as our example. Now, gears are normally played to your base, sometimes other parts of the field, as basically permanents that give you effects over the course of the game. So just explaining the anatomy of this Seal of Strength card, we once again have the cost of the card in the top left. You can see that it has a printed cost of 0, meaning you don't actually have to tap any runes in order to play this card. However, under that 0, you do see 1 orange rune symbol. That is another part of the cost that, for example, Traveling Merchant doesn't have. That's called a power cost. So whenever you see a power cost in the form of a colored rune under the number printed cost of a card, you must take that many runes and recycle them to the bottom of your rune deck in order to play this card. So specifically to play Seal of Strength, you do not pay any runes in terms of tapping them, aka you don't use any energy to play this seal, but you do have to recycle 1 orange rune to the bottom of your rune deck. That's called paying a power cost. Let's go down to the effect of Seal of Strength. As a reaction, you can add an orange power to your power pool. So in essence, you can use a Seal of Strength to play another Seal of Strength, or you can send an orange rune from your rune area to the bottom of your rune deck. If that's confusing, don't worry. We'll go over specific examples of when you pay energy for cards, as well as when you pay power cost for cards and the difference between both. Our next and final type of main deck card is going to be a spell. Spells in this game operate just how you would expect them to. When you use a spell, normally they will go to your trash or graveyard or discard pile upon use, and then they will implement their effect. For this example, we're using Bullet Time, which is actually a special type of spell. This is called a signature spell. Now, there are signature cards of so far units and spells. Maybe there will be signature gears in the future. But basically, when a card is a signature spell or unit, or possibly gear in the future, that means that you have to use or can only use that card if your legend is the corresponding legend that it requires. So for example, in the middle of the card here, you can see that this signature spell, Bullet Time, can only be played with Misfortune because Misfortune is listed on the card next to the term signature spell. But just going over cost once again, just to refresh our memories, in the top left, it does have a 1 printed cost, so you will tap 1 rune or pay 1 energy to play this card. It does not have any power costs in the regular printed cost of the card, at least. When you get to the effect, it says pay any amount of power to deal that much damage to all enemy units at a battlefield. That symbol there in the effect text is telling you to pay runes or recycle runes of any color. That's why it's sort of a rainbow color there. So that's going to work the same as if it did have a power printed cost, where you would pay and recycle X amount of runes to the bottom of your rune deck, and then you would deal that much damage to units at a battlefield. All right, now that we learned how the game board is laid out and all the different card types in the game, we're going to learn how to actually play and start a game. So how do we go ahead and do that? Well, firstly, you take your legend, put it in legend area. You take the champion of your choosing. In this deck, for example, we do have 2 different types of Misfortune. So you take the one you want, put it in your champion area. Once again, that's going to basically act as an extension of your hand. And then we're going to shuffle for the one and only time in the entire game. We're going to shuffle our main deck up, and we're going to shuffle our rune deck up. Since the rune deck is comprised of up to 2 different colors, it is going to be randomized, and you will get random colors based on how you built it when you do flip your runes. Now, to start the game, both players are going to select one of their field cards if this was a best of 3. So for example, I would take my field card and put it face down in the battlefield area. Then turn order is determined randomly. Most card game players do this by rolling a dice, for example. So you would roll a dice, determine that the higher winning roller would go first or second based on their choice, and then the fields are revealed. This is very important because some fields are better when you're going second versus when you're going first. And while you can pick what field you want to play out first in the first game, you won't know who's going first till after the dice is rolled and after the fields are selected. So keep that in mind. Now that the turn order has been determined and our fields are flipped face up, we go ahead and start the game by each drawing 4 cards. In this example, we'll say that we won the dice roll and elected to go first. So the 4 cards we've drawn Traveling Merchant, Bullet Time, Misfortune, the orange version, and Invert Timelines, which is a spell. So when you draw your first 4 cards, you do have the option to mulligan up to 2 of them. You can keep your entire hand if you would like to. In this example, I'll go ahead and mulligan Misfortune away and keep the rest of my hand. Again, don't forget I could send 2 cards to recycle in order to draw 2 new cards. So what I would do with this Misfortune that I don't want, I would recycle it, meaning again, put it to the bottom of my deck. And because I chose to mulligan 1, I will redraw 1. If you chose to mulligan 2, you would redraw 2. If you chose to mulligan 0, you would redraw 0 and keep that original 4 cards. Once you've gone through the mulligan process and your hand is finalized, you can only do that once, by the way. You then, at the start of your turn, draw an additional card. So you'll start the game with 5 cards in hand. And you also flip 2 runes off the top of your deck. If you are the player who goes second, you start with 3 runes. Otherwise, for the rest of your game, at the start of each of your turns, you will draw 1 card from your main deck and flip 2 runes from the top of your rune deck. Now let's get into actually playing cards. Remember our friend Traveling Merchant? He costs 2 energy, and we have 2 runes to spend as energy. So what we would do here, we would tap our 2 runes to pay that specific 2 cost that Traveling Merchant costs and put him into our base tapped. What that means is he cannot move the turn that he is played. No unit can move the turn it's played because all units enter play tapped unless otherwise specified. The first turn for most decks is going to be pretty standard, so we're going to assume that with our opponent's 3 runes, they played some sort of unit that cost 3 into their base. They didn't really go into a battlefield or anything, so we're going to assume that's what happened, and we're going to take our next turn. Once again, at the start of our next turn, we're going to draw 1 card from the top of our deck. We're going to flip 2 runes from the top of our rune deck, and we're also going to switch all of our cards to the ready or untapped position. After we've done all that, we enter our main phase of our turn where we can take a lot of different actions, especially now that we have a unit in our base, it's in ready mode, and we have more runes to work with. We can do a lot of things here, and I'm going to go over a lot of examples of what we could possibly do. Now that our friend Traveling Merchant is untapped or in the ready position, he can actually move to one of the 2 battlefields. Which battlefield I select is going to depend on which effects I prioritize more, and you'll learn that with more repetitions having played the game. In this case, I'm going to tap Traveling Merchant and move him up to Reaver's Row. That is how you do the action of moving a unit to a battlefield. Let's not forget Traveling Merchant's effect that says when I move, discard 1, then draw 1. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and discard Sneaky Deckhand to my trash, and I'm going to draw 1 new card from the top of my deck. Now, what happens when you take a unit and move it into a battlefield? What happens is a showdown begins. The showdown is kind of the entry point to a battle. Obviously, this is our second turn. Our opponent just played a unit to their base and didn't really do much else. So our opponent has nothing in this battlefield to actually defend against our Traveling Merchant. So there's not going to be much of a showdown. There's certainly going to be no battle. Our opponent would have the opportunity to possibly activate spells, but because they have no more runes to play that in this example, we're going to go ahead and take our conquer point. You conquer a battlefield and gain a point when you move a unit to a battlefield and either your opponent has no units to fight against you there, or you do fight your opponent's units there and you win that fight. So we've moved our Traveling Merchant up to Reaver's Row. We've gained a point. What else can we do with our turn? Given that we have 4 runes, we actually have quite a few options with the cards that are in our hand. We could look at a card like Primal Strength, which is a spell that says give a unit +7 might this turn. That doesn't really make much sense to do this turn because our Traveling Merchant isn't fighting anything this turn. There's no real reason to actually buff its power. We could also look at a card like Invert Timelines. Each player discards their hand, then draws 4. We could certainly activate the spell if we wanted to. Probably not the best move right now. Another thing we could look to do is go to our champion area. We have Misfortune Buccaneer here in our champion area, which once again is just an extension of our hand. Think about this card as if it were in your hand. It's just that your opponent knows it exists. So with Misfortune Buccaneer, her effect reads, you may play me to an open battlefield. Friendly units may then be played to open battlefields. That's a permanent follow-up effect. So her cost on the top left is 4. This card is slightly misprinted where it does actually have a purple power cost. It's just hidden behind her gun here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that 4 cost and that 1 power cost, and we're going to play her to the open Targon's Peak, which is the other battlefield that's currently open. So via Misfortune's effect, and because she's basically a card in our hand thanks to her being in the champion area, we're going to take her. We're going to play her in Targon's Peak. When you play a unit, don't forget, they enter play rested or tapped. Now, she costs 4 once again, so I'm going to tap 4 energy. 1, 2, 3, 4. She also has 1 purple power cost, which again is unfortunately hidden behind her gun there, but I promise you, it's there. So what that means is we are going to take one of our purple runes and recycle it to the bottom of our rune deck. That is how you pay for those color costs underneath the printed number costs of cards. Because I moved Misfortune to this open battlefield and my opponent has nothing there for me to fight, a showdown does begin, but no battle occurs. I will take control of this, scoring myself yet another point. And just like that, I am 2 points closer to winning the game. Next up, let's talk about combat. Now, combat is probably the most intricate part of the game, so this may require some follow-up videos for specifically how showdown and combat works in all of its intricacies. But for the purpose of learning how to play, I'm going to give you guys the quick and dirty version of how it works. So let's say we've done this for our turn. We scored our 2 points, put our units into these bases, took control of both of them. Now it goes back to our opponent's turn. Just like we did, they're going to ready or switch all their cards back to active mode. So this first mate that they played on their first turn, let's just say, is going to be ready and now can move to different places. They're also going to draw a card off the top of their deck and place 2 new runes down. They have their first mate, which has 3 power, 3 might. So we have a misfortune in one battlefield that has 4 might. We have a traveling merchant that has 2 might. If this first mate wanted to fight misfortune, that wouldn't really be a great idea because the misfortune has more might than the first mate. But our traveling merchant, he's a weak little guy. So what's going to happen is our opponent's going to move first mates into the Reaver's Row to try and fight our traveling merchant. So here's what happens. When a card attacks, the attacker has priority to activate any on-attack effects they might have. First mate doesn't have any on-attack effects, so we pass that priority. Next up is defending effect priority. So here, we are fighting at Reaver's Row. Now this is where the battlefield does play a role. Reaver's Row says when you defend here, you may move a friendly unit here to base. Since I am the one being attacked, I am defending, so I do have the option of moving my traveling merchant back to my base, which would effectively end the combat. But if I did that, this wouldn't really be a great explaining how to play video, so we're not going to go ahead and use that, even though we could if this were a real game. Once both players pass on their attacking and defending effect priorities, the attacker then again has priority to activate any spells or other such cards that they would have the appropriate timing to activate. In this example, our opponent just started their turn and moved first mate into Reaver's Row, so they theoretically have 5 open runes to potentially play spells. They could play any number of spells that they wanted to. For example, if they had a Primal Strength in their hand, since they are in essence playing an orange deck as well, they could activate Primal Strength with the 5 runes they theoretically have. However, because first mate is a higher might card than Traveling Merchant, there's not much of a reason for my opponent to actually go ahead and activate anything because they're winning this fight already. With how our example has gone, I am fully tapped out on my runes, so I can't even activate the Primal Strength or any other spell in my hand even if I wanted to. So since both players are passing on the priority of activating anything that they could activate in the showdown, we simply compare might. In this game, when cards fight, they do damage to each other. So Traveling Merchant has 2 might. He's going to deal 2 damage to first mate. First mate has 3 might. He's going to deal 3 damage to Traveling Merchant. Traveling Merchant does not have 3 HP. He only has 2. He would still be killed in this exchange. First mate is technically going to take 2 damage. That can be relevant in some circumstances. However, once a combat is fully resolved, all units on the field will heal of any damage they've been dealt for that turn. So first mate essentially gets away with this scot-free and is back to 3 might, which is also going to be his 3 health. Since my opponent won that combat, they now conquer this battlefield, and they get 1 point for doing so. To continue our example, let's just say our opponent's hand is not very good, and they pass the turn back over to us. So once again, we'll draw 1 card off the top of our deck, we'll switch all of our cards to the ready position, and we will flip 2 new runes from the top of our rune deck. So what happens now that this MF has survived in this battlefield and done what's called held the battlefield? Misfortune has held the battlefield. When a unit holds the battlefield, you get a point for that. So right at the very start of our turn, we've scored a point here at Targon's Peak. Keep in mind that each of your turns, each battlefield can only be scored at once. So there will be no shenanigans where we can move Misfortune back to our base and then move another unit to Targon's Peak and score another point. That wouldn't work because we've already scored a point at Targon's Peak this turn. So given the runes and cards at our disposal, we can continue playing as we would like to. We can play gears, we can play spells. I don't have any other units in my hand coincidentally, so I can't play any more units, but if I did have a unit, I could play it, and we would keep going in this back and forth faction, fighting smart fights, learning how to play the game as we get more repetitions with the game, and eventually we're going to need to score our final point. So now let's move on to an example of how we could possibly go about winning this game and how to score the final point. As I mentioned earlier in the video, scoring the final point does have some specific rules around it. Basically, to score your final point, you must do one of 2 things. You must conquer both battlefields in the same turn, or hold one of the battlefields for 1 whole turn to earn that last point. Holding is relatively self-explanatory. Let's say we had this first mate in Reaver's Row at the end of this turn. We pass to our opponent. If for some reason they cannot remove our first mate out of Reaver's Row, and we get to our next turn, we score our 8th point and we win. Simple enough. However, what happens if I have 7 points and I have a unit like first mate who can go conquer one of the battlefields, but I can't win the game because I need to conquer both battlefields in that turn to score the last point. This is what would happen. I would take first mate, I would move him to a battlefield. I do still conquer Targon's Peak here. However, due to game rules, I can't score my last point this way. So because I conquered, but I cannot score my last point, by game mechanics, I actually get to draw a card, which is really advantageous. It's still a great thing to get, but I don't win the game quite yet. I can win the game if I can somehow conquer this other battlefield here, Reaver's Row, in this same turn. Or, again, if I pass to my opponent, they cannot remove my first mate from this battlefield, and I hold, I will then score my 8th point. But let's say I'm impatient, I want to win the game this turn. How could I possibly go ahead and do that? I don't have any units in my base to actually move to Reaver's Row and try to conquer. Well, I do have another copy of Misfortune Buccaneer in my hand, and remember, she says, you may play me to an open battlefield. So I can take the Misfortune, which normally can only be played to a base if it were any other unit. However, because Misfortune, again, has her specific effect, I can play her to Reaver's Row, pay the 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't forget about that hidden purple cost she also has, the purple power cost. I could recycle a rune to the bottom of my deck, but in this example, I have Seal of Discord gear on my field. I can tap this card to pay for that purple cost instead of recycling a purple rune to the bottom of my deck. So I've played Misfortune to that open battlefield. This would be the second conquer of this turn, which would allow me to score that final point and win the game. All right, guys, so there you have it. That's how you play Riftbound 100% from start to finish. In this video, we went over the card types, the layout of the game mat, the progression of the game, and the important things you need to know about combat to get started. So now you can go ahead and play this game as much as you like. And hopefully today I'll be getting out that short video about how to actually set up Tabletop Simulator. So look out for that. It will be in the description of this video down below when it's ready and uploaded. So definitely check that out. I hope to see you guys playing Riftbound. Once again, I'm loving this game. I cannot wait for it to come out in October. Definitely hit the subscribe button because you'll be seeing more content on Riftbound from me. It's been a pleasure and a blast seeing you guys again, and I'll see you in the next video.